Good morning. As I'm listening to the presenters so far, I realize what a nerd I am because I get all excited about Common Core and state standards and primary sources and asking questions. How many of you got here by train today? Okay, not light rail. Okay, I got here by, pretty much my story starts with an 1800 steam locomotive, and that's not a traditional way. I know. I was born in Durango, Colorado. It's a railroad town started by William Jackson Palmer. And about 23 years later or so, I received a phone call on a payphone outside of where the engine had stopped. So I was listening like this to a payphone, imagine that, while I heard someone from Colorado Springs say, "You got the job. Call us later," because they couldn't hear anything with the engine behind me. So I hung up, got home, and called back, and I had a teaching job in another railroad town, Colorado Springs, and I've kind of been there ever since. And here we are in Denver, another railroad town. So that's kind of my story to start with, but some of you have train stories too. Others of you didn't have train stories, but we all have a story of how we got here. So that's kind of the theme of digital storytelling. I've been part of a Teaching American History grant for a long time, and Dr. Fritz Fisher always says if you don't have a primary source in a student's hand every day, you're failing them. So he started drilling that into my head, and then Dr. Bill Verdon kept saying you need to create digital stories, and I started to pull my hair out at doing that. It started with an inquiry question, and now I make my students do them. So it's really fun. The power of story, it's emotional truth, it's manipulation, bless you. You can also tie your story or whatever story the students are telling, the questions, the primary sources, it kind of makes a national narrative become a local or a regional connection. And so a lot of times students will say, oh, I didn't know that was down the street from us, or I didn't know that was part of Colorado history, because what's in the textbook is out there, but when it's in their archives or in their backyard, it makes it so much more real. It's good. They're 21st century learners. They're used to getting auditory and visual information all of the time. And so whether it's a digital story that you create and present to them, it's kind of cool to hear them say, you know, halfway through, is that your voice? Yeah, it's my voice. Did you make this? Yeah, I made it. And so that's kind of cool. Or if they're the ones that are doing the history, they have to go find the primary sources. They have to start with the questions. They have to cite the sources, and they become the historian. So that's kind of neat too. How to make it happen, just like Stephen was talking about earlier, it has to start with a question. So I guess if you're going to change one thing, it would be easy to tie it into digital storytelling. I have a whole unit that you're welcome to go to and edit, and it incorporates a lot of document-based question project. If you've worked with the DBQ project, Beth Montgomery said that since I loved it so much, I could steal that format for my students creating their digital stories. So have at it, steal it, edit it, make it yours, but it takes 8 days. So I know when I started out, I thought this is gonna be weeks and months, and I don't have time for that. It's not one more thing. It's a way to get them to use those skills that Stephanie was just talking about, that instead of quizzing them on level 1 rigor and are you really wanting them to regurgitate just facts about what you've taught them, can they do the history? And that's what I was just talking about there. With the Common Core, if you go back to the Common Core, if you're not a Colorado person and you're not worried about the Colorado state standards, it does hit the Common Core. So you've got the reading and the literacy Common Core, but then if you have them produce their own, it's also getting to the writing, because pretty much they have to write a document-based question answer so that then they kind of produce it into a visual. If it's Colorado, then it's standard 1. It's really just a means to an end. Ken Burns, who doesn't love a Ken Burns story? If you look him up about what he says about storytelling, he makes me cry every time, his little 5-minute blip about storytelling. Stories continue ourselves. It trusts in possibility that people can change. They're transcendent. And that's really what's going to connect students and help them retain the history and the stories and give them a sense of place and really become active citizens later on. After creating digital stories, they were really engaged. And so I said, well, now that you've done it, what do you think a historian does? And this is what they said. They were annoyed that they couldn't use Google. And you can also brainstorm some different ideas about ways to use this in your classroom. And that is all I have. Thank you very much.